Hi, and welcome to Coalesce Transformation Talks. In this episode, I want to talk about macros and how to use them in column transformations. Let's quickly introduce macros maybe. Macros represent a reusable code of Jinja, and Jinja is basically a templating language. You might have seen it already. It's nothing Coalesce exclusive. I think it originates from web development. It's often used in Django and stuff like that. And Coalesce just uses it to make it a bit easier to dynamically generate SQL code. And you will see it also, for example, in custom node types. But today we're going to use it in macros. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to directly jump into my Coalesce environment. So you should now see my canvas. It's pretty blank. We have one source table customer, which is coming straight out of the TPCH dataset. We have a customer key, name, address, nation key, phone, account balance, market segment, comment. And this is just a source node, right? I now want to do stuff with it. And for that, I created a stage node. And in this stage node, I basically didn't do anything yet, right? It just forwards the columns from my source node. And doesn't really do anything with it. You see I just executed it, it fetched some data, and it just forwards the data from our source node. But with the stage node, I now have the option to do actual transformations, create new columns, rename columns, stuff like that. You see there's a transform column here, which we're now going to leverage. So when looking at the source data, I see this account balance column. And I now have some business people telling me, hey, this account balance column is actually in cents, and we need it in dollars for further analysis. So please convert it to dollars and provide me that information. And that's a pretty straightforward, easy example of how and why to apply column level transformations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this transform field. I'm going to do a very simple division by 100, right? So I'm going to first show you something that's pretty convenient, right? So you see I'm going to use some double curly brackets. And inside those double curly brackets, I'm going to use an SRC because what I want in my SQL transformation is the source column name. And with double curly brackets, SRC, I can basically just leverage the source column information. And I'm going to divide this column by 100 because 100 cents equal $1, right? And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a data type casting here to numeric with a precision that I define here. And once I press enter, you see this double curly bracket SRC is actually turned into source table dot column name. If I now run this, we should see some changes in the account balance column. Let's see. And the account balance column is now a lot smaller, right? Because this is maybe a small business, and we now know that this actually represents dollars and not cents. This is now done. Basically, we met the business requirements. We can forward this information downstream, but this is a common scenario where you might want to do the same kind of transformation in multiple places, because you might have a dozen of columns that are actually cents and you need to transform them into dollars. So what you would end up with is you take this transformation, you copy and paste it over to all other columns, and that will do the trick, right? But what if now business wants a different precision for all of those columns? What would you need to do? You would need to modify all those places where you actually use this transformation, right? And that's a lot of maintenance effort. So as soon as this logic changes, maybe they don't want to use numeric anymore. Maybe they don't want to use money, something like that. You would modify like 100 occurrences, which is a lot of effort. Think about multiple transformations, applying each of them in multiple places. So that's the whole idea of a macro. We can easily turn this small snippet here into a macro, into a Jinja macro, and therefore make the same kind of code available everywhere. And once we have to change stuff, we only have to change it once. And I'm now going to show you how to do this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my build settings. And in my build settings, you see there's a macro section here, and we have those workspace macros. You might only see this one. I installed a package that has some macros. We ignore this for now. The workspace macros are where we're going to work in right now. To see right now it's empty. And we're going to directly start here by writing some Jinja code. So if you're completely new to Jinja, then definitely check that one out as well. But it's pretty straightforward. Jinja is easily identifiable by those curly brackets. In this case, also percentage signs. And we just define a macro here. We call it cents to dollars. This macro requires a column name. And we also want to put in a scale. How many decimal points do we need? I'm going to put in a default value here of 2 because that's what I typically want. But by this, I make it like overwritable, which is, pretty nice and makes it a bit more flexible. What I'm also immediately going to do is, because otherwise I would most likely forget this, I'm going to end this macro definition, which is something that's just required in Jinja due to the way it works, right? If you don't do it, you will get some errors. And within those boundaries, I can basically define my transformation. And for this, I'm just going to copy the transformation that I already have here. I put it in here, and I'm now going to just make it, or I'm going to parameterize it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this with the column information, right? We have a parameter called column, and I'm just going to insert that here with some double curly brackets because it's a Jinja variable. The other thing I want to include here is basically the scale, right? You see a 2 and here also a 2. So I'm also just going to call this Jinja parameter here and make it, or basically include the parameter in my actual output code. This is all I need to define here in my macro section. I can now jump back to my stage model and I can basically, let me maybe remove this transformation to all. So we keep account balance as it is, and we just create a new column that we call act dollar. And in here, we basically call our transformation, or like the macro that's defining our transformation, double curly brackets, because it's Jinja, right? The macro is called cents to dollars. And I'm going to specify the column. So I'm going to actively call the parameter column. And I'm going to put in here customer.cActVal. And I'm not going to define any scale. The default value of 2 works for me. I just have to close this one. And if I now, you see the transformation is in here, right? It calls the macro. If I just now rerun I actually have to recreate it. Yes, because there's a new column, right? So we now have a new column. We actually have there's always something, right? Maybe because I forgot to specify a data type here. Let's see if that helps. Yes, you see it was successful. Let me now execute it. I'm going to close those 2. If I now execute it, we should see in the fetch data. So first thing we see, the account balance is still as it was originally, right? So no conversion test happened here yet. But we see a new column called ActBell dollar that actually looks like it's converted from cents to dollars, which is great. What we can now also check is, if we go back to the results, we can basically have a look at the code that has been executed here. And you see for our ActBell dollar, the macro basically inserted the transformation and make it reusable. So if we now have to change stuff, we can easily go in here and adjust the macro. And everywhere where this macro is called, it will automatically reflect those changes. And that just drastically reduces the maintenance efforts, especially if you think about more complex transformations. This is like the easiest example I could make up. As soon as it gets more complex, the advantages of using macros are even larger, right? So basically as a takeaway, it's a big recommendation from our side. As soon as you see the same transformation in 2 places, you should at least consider moving that transformation into a macro and basically by this strongly reducing the maintenance effort if you develop and evolve your Coalesce implementation over time. Okay, so that's it from my side. I would now like you to maybe put in like a couple of example macros that you used in the past in the comment section And again, as always, let me know if there's anything interesting for you that we should cover in our next sessions. Check out our Data Vault Handbook. You can see it here in the QR code. Just follow the QR code and you can download it for free. And it will give you everything you need to know about Data Vault and how to implement it. Otherwise, thanks for watching and see you in our next session.